What is up, Nephilim? This is the Chig coming at you with another Diablo 4 video. Today we are going to be talking about how to pick your class and what might be the best class for you for release. And before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, anything you can do to help out the channel. Don't forget, as soon as we hit 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to be giving away a copy of Diablo 4. Let's hop right into it. I am super excited. This is the first video I've actually made notes for, so I'm pretty excited. And let's hop right into it. And I'm going to start with what is probably going to be my favorite class in my main, and that is going to be the Barbarian. So obviously everybody knows the power behind the Barbarian. We're tanky, we're strong, we're melee, we're in your face. You know, the fantasy of the big beefy warrior, rah, let's go kind of guy, right? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the fantasy of the Barbarian. Okay, so the Barbarian's going to be for anybody who wants to play that melee role, wants to be the big strong guy in the party, big, strong, slow swinging weapons, or fast hitting, you know, high impact things. So what we're going to look at is the strengths of the class. So the strengths of the class, your skills do big damage. You've got the berserking thing, which is going to be giving you extra damage and extra movement speed, and can be modified by other stuff. We got a lot of good movement abilities. We've got flat movement speed in our skill trees, so the mobility of the class is going to be awesome. And we also have some mobility cooldowns, because you can get charge, you can get leap. There's all kinds of things that help you get around the map. You can DPS while you are at range or close up. So one of the things I learned pretty early was rend kiting. So jump in, rend, run away. You know, you've got options, right? You've got things you can do close up. You've got things you can do far away. Some of your abilities have some range. It's pretty good. And also you're tanky, right? We've got these abilities that give us fortify, that make us take less damage. We've got shouts that reduce the damage we take. We've got a lot of like utility for group play and stuff, right? So we are going to be bringing a lot to the table as Barbarians. Now, some of the weaknesses of the Barbarian are going to be that we're going to be resource starved. Your resource does deplete when you're not in combat, so it's not like you can bank it up and take it with you to the next fight. Most of our abilities are pretty resource heavy. They're pretty expensive, but with that, they're very impactful. So we've got the long cooldowns, right? We've got cooldowns on our shouts. We've got cooldowns on our DPS abilities. This is going to lead to some spiky damage situations. It's going to be where like you jump in, you do your damage, you jump out, right? So that's going to affect your playstyle here and there. Obviously, there's going to be things that can change your cooldowns. There's going to be things that can affect the amount of resources that your abilities cost, but we're just talking in general here. We're not talking about having any legendaries or anything. This is just base gameplay. Melee can be detrimental to some players. Some people don't really like to be in melee. Some people want to be ranged. They want to feel safe. They don't want to have to be up in the boss's business. You know, some things are going to be hard to dodge. Even though we do have this evasion thing now, it's still going to be kind of hard to get out of the way of some of the abilities that they have. We also are solo, right? Like, we don't have pets like some of the other classes have pets that can help them out. It's just us, right? So we're the ones in there taking the brunt of the damage. I mean, obviously we do have Call of the Ancients. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but outside of that cooldown, we do not get anything to help us out. It's just us and what we've got and what we bring to the table. Another con for some people might be the slow early game, right? So the class scales really hard because, you know, you get your 4 weapons and stuff, which we'll also talk about that in a moment. But, you know, until you get better resource generation and cooldown management and stuff, it's going to feel a little more clunky to play the Barbarian. So it is going to be a little bit more, you gotta commit to the class in order to reap the rewards later on, because we all know it's going to scale really hard. These kind of classes always scale really hard. So you got to take up the brunt of embracing the suck in the beginning to get the rewards later on, right? Some of the cool things, right? We've got the fact that you can have 4 weapons. You get a 2-handed blunt weapon, you get a 2-handed slashing weapon, and then you get to dual wield any of the weapons that the class can dual wield, which is really awesome. With that, you also get the benefit of having 4 stat sticks on top of having all 4 aspects that you can have on these items. So we've heard other people talk about the multipliers you get for having things on your weapons. So the aspects are going to be stronger because we have them on the weapons, and we get 4 of them. So it's really going to impact your build a lot to be able to have 4 weapons. It's going to give you a lot more stats and a lot more fixes overall, which is going to be really strong. Another cool thing about that is you get to assign which weapon is used by what skill, right? So if you want to have your generator on the fast abilities for movement and for faster generation of your resource, instead of, you know, wanting your resource generator to hit as hard as possible, you can do that and then use your big clunky two-hander for your damage to spend your fury, which is kind of a cool little thing. I'm not going to go over very many of the spells. I'm just going to go over like the capstone things, the ultimate abilities. I will make another guide for each class that has the skills and stuff in it, and we'll talk more about that then. Some of the cooldowns that we have, I'm not going to go into the spec-specific stuff like what points you pick, but we've got Wrath of the Berserker, which is going to give us that berserk buff as well as make us unstoppable for X amount of seconds, and it's going to give us more attack speed or more attack damage and more fury regeneration, or it could increase more damage. There's a couple of different paths you can take with your abilities from there, right? Iron Maelstrom, which is something I think is really cool. It's got a really long cooldown, but you can activate it 3 times. The first time you activate it, it uses your two-handed bludgeoning weapon and hits the ground. Does an AoE, does decent damage, and stuns everybody. The second time, you use your two-handed slashing weapon, and that puts a bleed on everything and does a decent amount of base damage. And then the third time you use it, it uses both of your two-handers and does like a whirlwind style attack that does his moderate damage with each of those. So you could probably get all of those off in the time that your bludgeoning weapon does the stun, which is kind of neat. And then Call of the Ancients, we all know what that does. You summon the 3 Ancients, which the names of them elude me at the moment, but they come in, they bash face, and then you've got the different things you can do with them. So what I come up with kind of a summary for the Barbarian is that you're really strong, you're really mobile, and you're tanky, but you have to be in melee. You get to have 4 weapons, which is really cool, and you get extra aspects, you get extra stats, which is awesome. Big damage on your abilities and huge group utility. So you're going to be kind of spiky damage. You're going to have a lot of utility. And then you also have the arsenal thing, the unique thing that's specific to the Barbarian, which is going to give you extra bonus stats and stuff for each weapon as you level it up. And we'll go over that in the Barbarian specific class video we're going to do. All right, let's move on to the next one. We're doing the Druid. I'll start out with kind of what the Druid is. So you've got nature damage, you've got poison damage, you've got earth damage. Like, you've got a couple of different damage types, and you can also do physical damage and be a shapeshifter, which is really cool. So some of the strengths that we've got here for the Druid is there's a lot of burst damage potential, but it comes at the cost of a lot of spirit, right? So you can do a lot of burst damage, but it's going to cost a lot of spirit. So you're going to be doing a lot of generating and then spending. Versatile, you can do a lot of ranged or melee things. There's a lot of different things you can do with the Druid, and that makes it pretty cool to kind of think about and like, okay, cool, we can play this how we want and do, you know, all of these different things. The defensive abilities are pretty good as well. Don't take that as they're not squishy, just that they have some defensive utility, because you've got you know, a heal and some defensive cooldowns and like shield absorptions and stuff. One of the big weaknesses, let's hop into weaknesses. One of the big weaknesses is the positioning. You have to be positioned properly for your skills to do the most damage and be the most effective and to be the most powerful Druid you can be. Even though they have some pretty strong defensive cooldowns, overall the class is still pretty squishy. So you have to play that with that in mind. And they're pretty immobile, so you have to rely a lot on walking, going around mobs, or trampling through the mobs if you have your cooldowns up in order to reposition yourself. So it's going to make it a little harder to get your positioning and stuff right. So just like I said with the Barbarian, we're going to cover the skills and stuff in a separate video. We'll go over kind of like some leveling ideas and stuff. Some of the cool things too is there's companions, right? So you've got a couple of different companions that you can use. I'm not going to go over them because they're in the skills, but you know they have a passive ability, so they're always with you and they're doing things, and then they also have an active ability when you use them. So some of their big cooldowns are Cataclysm, which is going to be like a storm thing for 8 seconds. It's going to be striking lightning for big damage over the duration. You've got Petrify, which is a stun and debuff of all the enemies that are around you in an AoE, which is pretty awesome. It lasts for 3 seconds. And then Grizzly Rage, you transform into a werebear, getting enhanced combat abilities for 10 seconds, and it can be extended up to 10 more seconds. 1 second per kill you get while it's active, which is pretty neat. And then Lacerate, which turns you into a werewolf, and you dash between 10 enemies, and you deal big damage while you're dashing around. Some of the cool, unique things with the Druid are the spirit boons. So there's 4 different spirits that you can bond with, and each one of those is going to affect your gameplay in a different way. We'll go over that when we go over the Druid specific thing, and we'll talk more about how that's going to affect your gameplay when we get more information for it, because we don't really know everything yet because we're basing everything on the beta information that we have right now. As things come to light and I learn more, I will fill you guys in as I go as well. So now let's talk about the Necromancer, which if you watched my other video for my tier leveling list is easy mode even after the nerfs. It is an absolute joke, right? So the Necromancer, the strong boy of death, controlling corpses and raising things from the dead and making golems out of flesh and bone and doing all of these really cool dark magic style things. So some of the strengths of that is they have versatile damage. They have a lot of different damage types. They can do AoE damage, they can do single target damage. They're kind of all over the place. Another really strong thing is the blood orbs. So that's a unique mechanic to the Necromancer. You pick them up and it heals you. You pick them up and they give you resource, and it just kind of keeps you rolling. It keeps you going. It keeps you just banging it out, right? And that on top of having your summons to keep you alive by tanking things and being in your front line just makes it overall really strong. You have a lot of crowd control. You have stuns, you have snares, you have slows, you have bone prisons, you have all kinds of things to help you control the battlefield, which also just makes the Necromancer a heck of a lot easier to navigate the game world. I'm going to go ahead and say I would recommend the Necromancer to new players, and I'm going to let that stand. And we'll talk about that in another video as well, but that's kind of what you need, right? Also, they're pretty tanky for what they are, right? You have some cooldowns to help you stay alive. You have a couple of different abilities that give you fortifying stuff, and you're always healing with those blood orbs. So it's keeping your survivability up most of the time. So some of the weaknesses are ramping up. So you got to have corpses to summon your dudes, right? You got to summon more dudes to heal your dudes that are already out if something dies. So that's one of the big weaknesses, is you have multiple resources to manage. So you got to manage your main resource, and then you got to manage your corpses on top of that, and then you got to manage your cooldowns. So it's a really active play style, but it's really rewarding for learning how to do it properly. So it is kind of complicated in that fact though, right? Because you have to keep up with everything, you have to keep track of everything, and it makes it where it's you have to be mindful of what you're doing while you play it. And it can also be really gear dependent. You may hit a wall where it's like, okay, now I have to get better gear before I can continue, or now I have to X, Y, and Z before I can do A, B, and C, right? So their big cooldowns are pretty neat. So they've got Blood Wave, which is like a tidal wave of blood that deals damage and knocks back all enemies, which is defensive and offensive at the same time because it can reposition everything for you. You've got Army of the Dead, skeletons spawn and explode for the duration, and it lasts several seconds. You've got Bone Storm, which is a big AoE thing that goes around both the Necromancer and the Golem, if I read that correctly. And for the whole duration, it does AoE around you and the Golem. They have the Book of the Dead mechanic is their unique mechanic, which allows you to select what each kind of summon kind of does, right? So with the skeletons, you can do a high DPS version, you can do a tanky version, or you can do like a bursty DPS version. And then with the mages, you can do one that stuns, you can do one that slows. You have a couple different options. And then with the Golem, you have AoE, you have tanky, and you have AoE CC. So you kind of have all of these things all the way around. You also have the ability to sacrifice your summons to make your character stronger for each thing you sacrifice, and however you sacrifice it is going to increase, you know, X, Y, and Z in what your Necromancer itself can do, which is kind of really cool. I will also add that in order to unlock the golem, you do have to do a quest, which is kind of cool. You know, it kind of adds to the flavor. So we got 2 left. And these are the ones that were tied for my number 2 and number 3 on the leveling tier list video. So we've got Rogue first, right? And, you know, sneaky, assassin, in and out gameplay, doing big damage, dipping in, bursting your CDs, dipping out, getting back in the shadows. Like, that whole Rogue flavor and gameplay is something that I'm really into, and I really enjoy it, and I can't wait to play the Rogue and level 1 up. So the strengths, huge damage. You can delete mobs. You can absolutely destroy elites. The fastest boss kills I had in the beta were on the Rogue. You do obscene damage. Your mobility is crazy. You can dash in, you can dash out, you can teleport behind them with Shadow Step, you can deal extra damage, you can turn invisible. You're all over the place. It is amazing. It is a lot of fun, and it's just, man, it really lives up to the Rogue fantasy. They're really versatile. You can also play them ranged. You can play them as more of the archer role, which is really cool. Like the Barbarian, you get 2 different weapons for a total of 3. So you get to dual wield one-handers, and then you get a bow or a crossbow. All of the stats also combined, so you always have all of the stats, and you can, again, switch around your abilities to use the weapons that coincide with that ability. So some of the weaknesses of the Rogue are kind of similar to the Druid. The positioning. You have some abilities where if you're not standing in the right place, it's not going to hit more than one mob. So Twisting Blades, for example, you stab them in, and then when they come back to you, they will come back to you, but if there's no mobs in between you and your blades, it's not going to hit them, right? So you have to be really cognizant of your positioning if you want to be the most effective in AoE and stuff for those kind of abilities. They are really squishy. It is very glass cannon. If you get caught out, if you're in the wrong place, you are going to die. It's another thing with the positioning. You have to be on it. You got to be on point. You got to put your character where it needs to be. You've got to use your cooldowns properly. You have to make sure you don't die, which is kind of fun with the play style. It kind of fits that Rogue thing. It's like, cool, I'm wearing leather armor, I'm wearing light armor, I'm going to dip in and hit him, dip out, you know, do my thing, ha ha ha, right? And that's kind of like the mentality you got to have. Is like, boom, I'm going to hit him and get out, hit him, get out, right? So you got to play it in a similar manner. You got to make sure your positioning's right so you don't get rip and pepperonied. You do have some effects that are if this, then that, right? So if this buff is up, then it does this. If this is going on, this happens. If snared, XYZ, right? There's a lot of conditional things that happen with the Rogue, which is not bad. It's just different and things that you have to think about. We already went over the different weapons. We'll go over the skills in a different video. So some of the class specifics. So you get 3 imbuements. You can do Poison Imbuement, which will add a damage over time and can be modified further to give you extra crit and stuff against your opponent. Shadow, which adds a debuff that explodes on death or explodes after a duration and can also increase your critical hit chance against that mob. And then Cold Imbuement, which will add a chill effect to your attacks that are imbued, as well as doing extra cold damage, which is kind of a cool thing to kind of have in your back pocket. Kind of gives you a little bit of group utility, but since you don't really have a lot. So some of the cool big skills, we've got Shadow Clone, which is going to summon a clone that mimics your abilities and deals damage while you deal damage, which is just basically, here, let's do extra damage while we're using our same rotation. So it's going to be really easy to use that when you pop your clones. It just copies what you do and makes big damage. Rain of Arrows, big AoE that you use your bow for, which is kind of neat. It's short and has a moderate cooldown, short duration, but does a big AoE and does a lot of damage, which is kind of really cool. And then you've got Death Trap, which is a trap that you lay down that after a second and a half is armed, and when it blows up, it deals big damage. And then some of the specializations you get, your other class-specific thing is Combo Points, which lets some of your abilities have additional effects per combo point that you have. You have Inner Sight. Once your Inner Sight gauge fills up, you have 4 seconds of infinite resource, which is kind of cool. 4 seconds isn't really that long. I think that could stand to be tweaked a little bit. And then you have preparation, which we weren't able to use in the beta. So I'm not real sure what that does. Based on some of the things that I saw over on Maxroll, it may have something to do with resetting cooldowns of ultimate abilities or something similar. So can't really speak to that yet. So if you want to fit the let's go in and out, quick playing, just doing work kind of thing of the rogue, you know, that assassin playstyle, you definitely can't go wrong with that. And then last but certainly not least is the sorcerer. So master of the elements, you've got different elements that you can use spells from. You can use ice element to slow and stun and deal cold damage. You can use lightning for AoE things and some more random things. You can use fire for burning stuff to the ground. Like, there's just so many different things you can do, and the mobility is amazing, and we'll go over that in a second. And the strength, just the sorceress and the sorcerer in general should just get you really excited, because this is going to be awesome. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be my second most suggested class. I think everybody should play a sorcerer or a necromancer. Necromancer first, of course, and then sorcerer. So the strengths of the sorcerer: you've got huge AoE damage. You've got screen wide stuff that you can get. You've just got a lot of work you can put in AoE wise. You have a lot of CC. You've got slows. You've got stuns. You've got basically everything under the sun. Your mobility is nuts. Not only do you get to run around, you've got teleport, which is on a relatively low CD. So you're going to be able to reposition yourself between teleport and your dodge. You're going to be able to really, really put yourself where you need to be on the battlefield. There's a lot of good defensive skills. You've got armors, you've got shields. Teleport comes to mind there too. Like, all these things that are going to help you stay alive. Some of the weaknesses of the class are going to be that they're mana hungry. And you have ways to get back more mana, but as a general baseline, you're regenerating mana as you play, and it's going to be spent a lot as you're playing. So you're going to be hearing, "Oh, not enough mana," a lot when you're playing through with this class. Another thing, you are very squishy. If you get caught out without your defensives, you are probably going to die. I was playing my sorcerer the one time that I had the butcher come up. I got instantly ripping pepperoni. I was doing a dungeon by myself. I couldn't get away from him. He couldn't be slowed. He couldn't be kited. I just died. And there's nothing I could do about it. Like, I tried everything in my power. I tried to slow him. I tried to stun him. I tried everything. And he just deleted me because there was nothing I could do. You have no real group utility other than your big damage. If you're playing with somebody that does have more group utility, like I'm planning on playing my Barbarian, and one of my buddies is planning on playing a rogue, if we could get a sorcerer to add to the party, I would be ecstatic. So hit me up if you think you want to be the sorcerer in my group play. Like I said about the other classes, we're going to go over the skills in a different video. I intend to make kind of some leveling guides for each class, kind of go over my thoughts on what you should use or not use to level up and why. It may or may not follow some of the guides you find from other people. I mean, obviously we're just going with my opinion here. That's why I wrote down my thoughts instead of something else, right? So the big cooldowns to think about for the sorceress, one of them is deep freeze, which is really cool. You freeze yourself in place for a couple of seconds, and while you're frozen, you pulse an AoE, and then after it ends, you explode for more damage, which is really cool. I think that is a really awesome utility. If you're waiting on your cooldowns to come back up to blink away or something, you can just be immune and deal huge damage while you're waiting on that, which is amazing. You've got the Inferno ability, which everybody has seen the videos of the big snake. That is awesome. It just deals big damage over a couple of seconds and has a really sweet animation. So you just that's just a really cool one. I would play a sorcerer just to be able to summon that big snake. And then you've got Unstable Currents, which makes it where for so many seconds, every time you use a shock skill, you cast another random shock skill. So they can be generators or spenders, the way I understand it. I didn't really try that one out a whole lot, but I think it's going to be really cool to see how each of those work. So the unique class mechanic is enchantments. I wrote down a couple of them to go over, but what they do is you get to pick a skill and enchant basically all your other skills with something that it does. You can have the skill equipped and enchant it at the same time. So you can have the ability and then enchant its abilities onto your other abilities. So some of the ones that I wrote down were Frostbolt, adds a chill to everything that you do. Firebolt adds a burn to everything that you do, which I think is really cool. I think it'd be really cool to have Frostbolt or Firebolt on your Frostbolt, and you're kind of doing like the Frostfire thing, which is kind of neat. Spark can spawn lightning. Arc Lash makes your cooldowns have a stun things that are around you for half a second. Frozen Orb just gives you a chance when you're using your spenders to summon a Frozen Orb, which is really cool. Ice Shard summons a random Ice Shard every couple of seconds, which is neat, you know, and then Fireball, when the stuff dies, it explodes. Like, the list goes on and on. You've got everything for basically all of your abilities for the Sorcerer. And there's just so many more. I just didn't really feel like I had enough time to talk about all of them. So let's go over and let's do a recap. So the Barbarian, if you want to be the melee dude that's tanky and you want to have a lot of group utility and you want to have big stats and scaling really hard and the ability to be that guy, right, that went through and put in the work, that's getting the rewards later on, go with the Barbarian. Yes, it's going to be a little rough to start out leveling the Barbarian, but it's going to be worth it in the long run. Got the Druid, the nature, the shapeshifter, the storms and the wind and the tornadoes and all of these cool things. If you want to be the shapeshifter that turns into a werewolf and just shreds things, or you want to turn into a bear and be just a big tanky boy for a little bit, or, you know, if that fantasy just meets you. I like the storm stuff. I think the storms are really cool. So, you know, make a wind druid and do tornadoes, you know, whatever you want to do. Like, if that fits your fantasy, do it, right? Don't let the leveling tier list deter you from picking a class that you want to play. If you want to be a rogue, hop into it. Be the assassin. Get in there. Get out. Dart in. Deal damage. Pop out. Be a archer. You know, like, play to your strengths, right? If you like that play style, play that. Obviously, I did recommend that class because of how strong it is, but play what you like. Sorceress. Big damage. Big cooldowns, big everything, it's flashy, the spells look cool, you get to be a master of the elements, you get teleport, who doesn't want teleport? It's just really, really cool, really fun, really exciting. And then if you want to play the game on easy mode, you want to be a master of the dead, you want to summon the demons, you want to bring skellies up from the ground, and you want to build golems out of mud and bones, be the Necromancer. The Necromancer is going to be your ticket to easy mode, it's going to be fun to play with your buddies. I'm hoping that the shouts from the Barbarian buff the pets from the Necromancer, and if that is a synergy, my friend that's going to play the Necro is going to be super excited. Elgoog, you know who you are. You better watch this video and you better comment on it, bro. Anyway, if you guys have any questions, leave them down in the comments. Let me know what class you want to see first for the leveling guides. Otherwise, I'm going to do Barb because that's what I'm going to be playing. I am not a theory crafter. I'm going to make my guides based on what I think would be fun and cool to do, not what is mathematically best. Do not expect to see all meta guides from me. I will make some guides that are meta. I will not make all guides that are meta because I like to play with things. I like to try things out, and I would highly recommend playing what you think is fun on your playthroughs until you're ready for your end game build. Anyway, if you stuck around to the end of this, I am super excited to have you here. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget about the giveaway. And get hyped. D4, man. It's right here. We're doing it. Let's go.